All right, Mike, it sure doesn't sound like a very good idea to be eating peanut butter and consuming all the bad oils after the description that you just gave as an example. I am also assuming the need for the diabetic medication would be reduced dramatically as well.
Good assumption, as that's what the observation has showed me time and again. In fact, I'll give you some really cool cases in regards to what we're talking about here. The first case I'd like to talk about is a case of scleroderma. Many years back, a friend of mine came by with their brother Dan that I'd never met before. When they came walking through the door, I about fell out of my chair, as I'd never seen a medical condition like his. I could not believe what I was seeing. I got up out of my chair to go over and introduce myself to Dan, and his face had the glow of a porcelain doll, and the skin on his face was stretched so tight he looked like a mannequin. He could barely walk, maybe half a step at a time, with his head down, and I could tell he was in terrible pain. When he took off his hat, his hair was so thin that I could look at the top of his head, and it looked as if he'd undergone chemotherapy. He then looked at me and said that his sister had told him about the research our foundation does, and asked me if I'd ever seen anyone with his disease before. I said that one time a lady I'd met had this disease on one hand and a very small area of her face, but never anything like you have. Then I asked him, what's the name of this disease? And he said scleroderma. I then asked him, how badly are you affected by this disease? At that point, he took off his coat and shook hands with me. His hands were like that of a dead person, or solid like wood, and he could not close his hands. His arms, when I felt his arms, were rock hard, as well as his shoulders and down his back, because I touched the whole area. He wanted me to touch the area, and I just put my hand on the area, and it was like solid wood. Then he told me, what you're seeing on the outside of me is happening to all my internal organs on the inside. I knew at that point he had an autoimmune disease, or suspected it, that his body was actually attacking him. I'll tell you, Justin, I was absolutely fascinated by this disease and really felt bad for him and what he was going through. I want to point out something here, that scleroderma is believed to be an autoimmune disease in which your immune system, for some unknown reason, turns against your body. Scleroderma simply means hard skin. In some forms of scleroderma, you'll see a hard type skin, and that's the extent of the disease. But in other forms like Dan had, the problem goes much deeper, affecting his blood vessels, his internal organs, his heart, lungs, and kidneys. In Dan's case, his lungs were affected a great deal, and you could tell, as he was having a great difficulty in breathing. I asked Dan how old he was, which he replied 48 years old. Since I hadn't seen the disease like this, I assumed he'd had this for a very long time. I asked Dan, when was he diagnosed with scleroderma, and he told me about 3 years ago at age 45. I'll tell you, Justin, this caught me totally off guard. And I said to Dan, surely you had the symptoms of this disease for a very long time, and not just the past 3 years. He was a little bit out of it when I was talking with him, and I could tell he was really hurting. He had said he had no symptoms, which I found hard to believe at that time, and that response may have been due to his condition when I was talking with him. He said when the disease actually came over him, it traveled up his right hand, arm, and then proceeded the past 3 years throughout the entire body. He then told me, other than helping with some pain control, absolutely nothing the doctors were doing was helping him. And he indicated he was going downhill very fast and losing all hope. I'll tell you, Justin, Dan appeared to me to be in very, very bad shape, and in my opinion, not far off from dying. Not to mention the excruciating pain he was in. He also said that his pain levels, when on the medications, were running 9 on a scale of 10, being the worst pain you could be in.
That had to be a real shock to have him just walk in with his sister and just to see someone like this. I mean, I have never heard of someone with this disease.
It was a shock. In Dan's case is one that I will never, ever forget as long as I live. Having listened to Dan, I told him his swimming pool, his entire body, is out of balance very, very badly. And it appears to me his genetics carried him into this disease when his body got too far out of balance. I also told him that it appeared to me that his own autoimmune system was attacking him, and he needed to get the attack pulled off. I told him systemic enzymes, or a blend of systemic and digestive enzymes, have worked well in stopping autoimmune attacks. I also shared with Dan and his sister some additional research information which they took with them to share with Dan's wife so they could all get on the internet and continue their own research. When Dan and his sister left that evening, I didn't hold much hope out for Dan, but I had no idea they would take the information I'd given them from my research and follow through so thoroughly. They ultimately applied the research to Dan's case, and it's absolutely amazing what happens as this disease started to reverse itself, moving towards remission, and how well he was progressing. I asked Dan and his wife Debbie if they would write his story so I could share it with everyone. They liked the idea, and I have a copy of Dan's scleroderma story, which was written by Dan and Debbie, and would like to take a few minutes and read this story to everyone today.
I think that'd be great, as it would give everyone a better insight as to what Dan went through by telling his very own story.
I thought so too, so here's Dan's scleroderma story. I spent a lifetime in physical labor employment, which included waterproofing, roofing, furniture making, and carpet installation. In 2001, I started to become fatigued easily, and my dexterity wasn't where it needed to be to continue any of these professions. In January of 2002, I realized I just couldn't do the requirements of physical labor any longer, no matter how hard I would push myself. I was becoming seriously worried something was physically wrong with my body. I thought I might take some time away from work and rest my body to regain my ability to join the workforce. But as time went by, even this didn't work. My health was slipping and I was having more problems. My hands started turning purple, and as time went on, my feet were turning purple. In August of 2004, I went to a medical clinic convinced I had diabetes. Tests were run, but this was ruled out. I went back to the clinic several times and saw a number of doctors. They just could not figure out what was wrong with me. By this time, my entire lower body would turn a very dark purple, with the upper half of my body staying my normal white complexion. In the spring of 2005, I was admitted to the hospital and tests were run based on what the clinic doctors speculated might be responsible for my symptoms and my overall health condition. After all the tests were completed, I was released from the hospital, waiting the results. When the test results came back, again, the doctors had no answers. I began to lose all hope that I would ever have an answer as to why my health was continuing to deteriorate. A few more months went by and things were only getting worse. In 2005, I thought it was time to try again. I decided to go back to the clinic. This time there was a dermatologist there. He walked into the room, taking one look at me and said, "You have scleroderma." I'd finally received my answer, but would not find out until later what the word scleroderma would mean to me. I was overjoyed that finally a doctor was able to put a label on the disease that had altered my life over the past 4 years. Now that the doctors knew that I had scleroderma, the question became what doctor could help me. Scleroderma is not a common disease, and little is known how to treat it, and further from unknown its cure. I was then sent to a rheumatologist. For the next 2 years, I would take the medications prescribed by the doctor, while my body and my hopes continued to deteriorate. My skin was becoming like plastic. My arms had lost all hair, and I looked and felt like a mannequin. The skin on my face resembled that of a reptile. I couldn't hold a softball in my hand and was fast becoming nearly immobile. The scleroderma was also taking over the organs in my body. I was finding it difficult to swallow and breathe. I walked with my back slumped, knees bent, and head hanging. I believe this was not only due to the weakness in my neck, but in my soul, and I knew I was dying. My weight prior to this disease was 167 pounds, and had now fallen to 126 pounds. I had become so depressed that I had no appetite, even when I could swallow, and at this point was strongly thinking of giving up. In the fall of 2007, I was introduced to the Vibe machine. I was told of the positive results people were receiving when they simply sat in front of this energy machine. Hearing this, I believe, gave me a spark of hope. Through this period of time being treated by the doctor, all I ever heard was how the pain would get worse and there was no cure. I decided to give the Vibe machine a try, even though I was very reluctant. My sister took me over one evening for my first Vibe session. It took all the strength I could find in myself to take this trip for the Vibe visit. I remember how rude I must have been at my first visit. You see, at this time in my life, I carried a wall to block any promises of hope and relief of my pain, so as to not be followed by disappointment. I sat down in front of the machine for about 2 minutes, and my sister then took me back home. Shortly after I arrived back home, I began to notice the tightness in my fingers and hands to lessen. I seemed to be a bit more alert and even sleep better that first night. The next day, I still felt these effects. I decided I wanted to have another Vibe session. The second session, I arrived with a much better attitude. Upon completion of the second session, I noticed a lessening of the pain and stiffness in my hands and throughout my whole body. Now I had a bit of excitement thinking about going to my third session. The third session gave me even more relief. I could feel the energy created by the Vibe machine flowing through my entire body. The next Vibe sessions brought me something even more. I felt the hope and spirit slipping back into my soul. I really didn't understand these feelings, but they were very welcome. I attributed some of this to the Vibe machine, but most to the people I was surrounded by at these sessions. The others using the Vibe machine offered me encouragement, hope, and warmed my heart. I enjoyed so much the stories everyone had of how the Vibe machine had helped them in some manner for their different issues. During this time, Mike Vrentas gave me some research information about a German cancer researcher, CellectBudwig. They said she was responsible for an oil protein diet called the Budwig diet that had healed thousands of people from some terminal diseases. Mike suggested I might want to try it, as my disease may be related to a lack of electron-rich unsaturated fats. I didn't understand what he was talking about, but took the paper that had been written about Dr. Budwig home. I read it and decided I'd give it a try. I used part of the diet by combining 2 tablespoons of 2% low-fat organic cottage cheese with 1 tablespoon of Barlean's organic flax oil. I blended it together with an immersion blender, which it called for, put some fresh cut-up pineapple on top, and simply started eating it 3 times per day. The first time I ate this blend of oil and cottage cheese, within 5 minutes, my body started tingling from my head to my feet, as though I was standing in front of the Vibe machine, but not quite at the same level. It felt like my body was absorbing this oil combination, like a sponge would absorb water. My body craved it, and I will continue to consume it daily for the rest of my life. I've now been using the Vibe machine for the last 4 months, averaging about 3 times per week, and continuing with the Budwig diet. My skin looks more like skin again, and my hair has now grown back on my arms and filled in much thicker on my head. The skin of my arms is now returning from being solid to the touch with no flexibility to becoming softer to the touch. I can now close my hands with my fingertips touching the palms of my hands, put on my shoes and socks, and can tie my shoes. I walk further, stand straighter, and I no longer hang my head. I'm now able to swallow, eat, and breathe better, and have put on 10 pounds. After 18 weeks, my overall condition has improved 70% and gaining daily. When I recently went to see my doctor, he came into the room and just looked at me without saying a word for at least 5 minutes. He then said, "Dan, you're my poster child. What are you doing differently?" I thought to myself, I'm not your poster child. Looked at him and said, I've changed my diet and I'm now eating organic foods as much as possible. He said he didn't believe this had anything to do with my improvement, and I did not elaborate, as I don't believe he would have understood. I then left his office, and I'm sure he's still shaking his head in disbelief. I know I am. I have now, after 18 weeks, regained my appetite, not only for food, but also for life. The following is what I've done to conquer this terrible disease.